Today I'm going to show you how I built a crib for our baby girl Abigail, and I call it Abigail's Nest. Before we go ahead, I've got a small confession to make. You see, our baby girl was born on the 9th of August last year, and today is the 16th of January. Yeah, I know, I'm a bit late, but don't judge me. I've got a plan to make up for lost time, and that is to build a crib to be able to convert it into a toddler's bed, and to finish it before the end of the month. Oh yeah, and my wife doesn't think it's possible for me to have it finished before the end of the month. I don't blame her. But yeah, let me show you the design.
The crib consists out of two main sections. The storage cabinet on the bottom that houses two drawers, and a crib section on top of that consists out of 4 rails and a support platform for the mattress that can also be set to 2 different heights. And then my attempt to make up for lost time, an additional rail that can be swapped out with the front rail to transform the crib into a toddler's bed. Now let's get back to breaking down the lumber. One of the most satisfying feelings is to take a piece of rough lumber and to mill it down until it's silky smooth. Although the process is super satisfying, it's also extremely boring. It's boring while you're doing it, and it's even more boring to watch someone else do it. So instead of boring you with an 8-minute video of me milling down a bunch of planks, I'd rather just give you a short montage of my process. I start by jointing one face, then planing the opposite face of the board, finding the most wonky edge and jointing it, then ripping the opposite edge on the table saw. Now that all the lumber is milled, the next step is to rip the boards into their smaller pieces. Just by looking at the top section of the crib, there's roughly 75 pieces, with 48 of them being the vertical slats. Now whenever you remove a lot of material from a board, or in this case, rip the board into several smaller pieces, there's always a possibility for movement to occur. Now to prevent ending up with wonky bent pieces, I'll be ripping the crib pieces slightly oversized, and give them some time to rest to allow any movement to occur before I mill them down to their final size. While the crib pieces rest for a few days, I shifted my attention to building the bottom cabinet. The cabinet will mostly consist out of white oak, with the exception being the drawers, back panel and middle divider. My first step was to rip the oak planks to their final dimensions for the glue up of the 4 oak panels. These 4 planks will be glued together to be used for the 2 side panels. And to save some wood, the top and bottom panels will only be a figure 8 frame instead of a solid board. For the sake of convenience, I'll be using dominoes throughout the entire project. And the first place that I'll be using it is with the cabinet's panel glue-ups. Now the final piece of the cabinet structure will be the middle divider. That is basically a sheet of plywood with an oak strip edge banded to the front. While the glue is drying, let's take a closer look at the assembly of the cabinet. The 4 outer panels will be glued and fixed together with 45-degree miter joints that will be reinforced with some dominoes. And then the drawer divider will be glued to the top and bottom panel right in the center of the cabinet. And to ensure that the divider doesn't shift during glue up, I will use some dominoes to align it. Before I could cut the miters on the panels, I needed to remove the excess glue, rip them to the final dimensions, label them, and mark the locations of the dominoes. For some reason, no matter how many times I've done it before, I'm always a little bit anxious when it comes to cutting miter joints, especially on larger panels like these. To prevent screwing it up, I always try to cut them on my table saw with a sled, and as an extra precaution, I adjust the blade angle to slightly past 45 to 44.9 degrees. This ensures that I always get closed outside edges, resulting in flawless miter joints every time. To complement the mid-century modern aesthetics of the dresser I built in my previous video, I plan to incorporate a 45-degree bevel along the inner edges of both the front and the back faces of the cabinet. The final step before I could assemble the cabinet was to mark and cut the positions of the dominoes for the middle divider. I then used my assembled cabinet as a reference and cut the middle divider to its final size. After I've checked that everything aligned correctly, it was time for panic at the glue up. I allowed the cabinet to remain clamped for several hours, ensuring that the glue fully cured before I removed the clamps and cleaned up the excess glue. By now, the oversized pieces for the grip fences have had a few days to settle, and I can finally mold them down to their final dimensions. Now some pieces did warp a little, so I quickly ran them through the jointer to ensure that they're perfectly flat and square before I plane them down to their final dimensions. Now that all of the pieces were down to their final dimensions, I could start with the top side of the crib. The first step was to cut all of the frame pieces that would contain the vertical slats. By using my cabinet as a reference, I started to cut the frame pieces of the 2 side rails. While it's not completely necessary, I added dominoes to all of the frame joints. This gave me the opportunity to dry fit everything and to make it a lot easier during glue up. With the side frames done, I repeated the process for the front and back rails by using the cabinet and side rails as reference. The crib is designed to be able to assemble and disassemble. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to fit through a door or to be able to convert into a toddler's bed. So to align the rails, we'll be using dominoes. And to fix them together, we'll be using furniture screws. The next step was to cut a rabbet on the bottom frame pieces. The rabbet will function as a little reveal between the crib and the cabinet, just to give it some visual separation between the two pieces. Now to cut the rabbet, I used my table saw with a sacrificial piece clamped to the fence and repeated it for all of the bottom pieces. To adopt the modern look of the cabinet, I added a 45-degree bevel on the inside edge of the frame pieces. Before we go on, you might be wondering what day it is.
My wife was correct. As you can see, it's not finished, and today is the 31st of January, and I'll clearly won't be able to finish it by the end of the day. So yeah, but no worries. I'm still enjoying the build extremely, and I think it's gonna look awesome once it's finished.
To cut the bevel, I used my palm router with a 45-degree chamfer bit, making sure to increase the depth of the cut little by little until I reach a depth of 10 mm. I did not like the rounded corners that the router left, so I used a flush cut saw and a chisel to square up the corners. With the frames of the rails done, I could turn my attention to the vertical slats. My first step was to remove the sharp edges with a palm router and a round over bit, followed by cutting them to length using my rails as reference. I'll be using dominoes to fix the slats to the rails. So the next step was to mark the positions of the dominoes on the rails, making sure they are evenly spaced, leaving a gap of around 2 inches between each slat. Once I had all of the positions marked out, I started to cut the mortises, beginning with the rails and then moving on to the slats. A whopping total of 260 mortises that I had to cut. The next step was to drill the holes for the furniture screws. I started by marking the positions of the holes. I wanted the screw to sit flush with the wood surface, so I first used a Forstner bit to cut a recess for the screw head, followed by a normal drill bit to drill the through hole. I then used the frame piece with the existing hole to transfer the position to the mating frame piece. I then drilled the hole with a smaller drill bit on the transferred mark and used a good quality tap bit to cut the thread directly into the wood. With that done, I dry fit the rails to make sure everything aligned correctly, pre-glued the dominoes into the rails, sanded all of the rail pieces with 80 and 120 grit paper, and then moved on to the final glue up. After a few hours, I removed the clamps and test fitted the assembly. Once I was happy with how everything came together, I moved on to the mattress support. The mattress support will have two rails that will bolt onto the crib side rails, which the mattress support slats will sit on. I glued two oak strips together for each rail. I then cut them to length using the crib as reference, drilled the mounting holes, transferred the positions of the mounting holes onto the crib rails, and then finished it off by rounding over all of the edges with a palm router. I then installed the rails onto the crib to get the exact measurements for the plywood slats. I used my table saw to cut a test piece and then proceeded to cut all 7 support slats. Now the last thing before I could start doing touch-ups and finishing was to add foot pieces to the cabinet. The design of the foot pieces were quite simple. It's basically just a square block that's 30mm thick with 2 bevels cut on the inward facing faces. To cut the bevels on the foot pieces, I made a small sled out of some scrap pieces and used it on the table saw. I quickly sanded the foot pieces and then glued them directly onto the cabinet. I then sanded the cabinet with 80 and 120 grit sanding paper, drilled and tapped the last mounting holes, did some touch-ups using black super glue, and then finally moved on to applying the finish. Now the finish I'll be using is Rubio Monocoat Natural. It's a 2-part hard wax oil that looks great on white oak, and like the name implies, you only need 1 coat. But most importantly, the application is very easy. You just apply the oil mixture, let it penetrate for a few minutes, then wipe off the excess oil with clean terry cloth and let it dry for 24 hours. With the finish done, the last thing to do was to make the drawers, drawer fronts and back panel. For the drawer fronts and back panel, I used some NDF that was lying around in my shop that I cut to size on the table saw and finished them off by giving them a coat of white furniture paint. For the 2 drawer boxes, I just used some white melamine face chipboard that I edge banded and fixed together with some screws. I then finished the cabinet by installing the hardware, drawers and painted front and back panels, and just like that, it was finally time to assemble the crib.
Today is the 28th of February and we're finally assembling the crib. Just a month late, but who's counting? That's Abigail's nest finished. It looks amazing, better than expected. I really enjoyed building it. If you enjoyed watching me build it, please like and subscribe. And if you want to build yourself a crib like this one, I will have plans available. Just look for the link in the description below. And before I say goodbye, I've got one last thing to share. Okay, I won't go into too much detail, but this crib should have been empty, and it's not. You see, my wife and I struggled with infertility for several years, until the moment Jesus Christ stepped in and blessed us with a perfect little girl, Abigail. Now the Word of God says that He is not a respecter of man, meaning what He did for us, He wants to do for you as well. So if you've got a similar problem, we would like to pray for you and urge you to reach out to your local church. There is immense power in prayer, especially prayer in numbers. So your miracle might just be around the corner. So if you want us to pray for you, or if you want to hear our full testimony, please reach out to us in the comment section below, or you can contact us directly. You can find my contact details in the channel's information page. Until next time, thank you for watching.